Hey guys, tonight we're stepping softly into the frostbitten hush of a world lit only by fire, where the nights are long, the wind fights harder than any tax collector, and bedtime is more about survival than relaxation. You're walking through crusted snow under a slate gray sky, your boots crunching on frozen earth, the air so sharp it stings your nose. In the distance, a cottage sighs against the cold timbers, creaking chimney smoking, and inside, well, you're about to find out how people actually slept through the coldest nights of the medieval world. Spoiler, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes, especially not in those thin pajamas of yours. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love seeing this sleepy little community across time zones. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The cottage door groans open, and you're immediately wrapped in a bouquet of smells: wood smoke, wet wool, onions, and something that might be old bread or a damp sock. It's hard to tell. This is not a castle. This is not a noble estate. This is where most people lived, huddled in a single room with low ceilings packed with children chickens and furniture that looks more like splinters tied together with twine. You move carefully over the uneven floor, avoiding a sleeping dog and a basket of potatoes. The hearth is the only source of light, casting flickering shadows onto the thatched roof. In one corner, a woman is braiding her daughter's hair. In another, a man wraps his feet in cloth and mutters something about frost nipping his toes off. This, dear friend, is bedtime, but the most surprising thing, it's not miserable. It's quiet, it's slow, and it's very, very human. The bed, if you can call it that, is a raised wooden frame covered with straw, then topped with wool blankets, and maybe if they're lucky, an old fur coat. There's no such thing as privacy. Everyone sleeps in the same space, often pressed together for warmth. Kids sleep next to parents, grandparents at the edges, and anyone particularly smelly near the door. You ease into the corner, trying not to disturb the delicate sleeping order. A girl pulls a blanket over her head, mumbling a prayer. Her brother rolls onto his side and lets out a soft snore, like a sigh wrapped in cloth. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants got good sleep, but what's clear is that their sleep was communal, layered, and deeply attuned to the natural world. When the sun set, life slowed. When the fire dimmed, people followed. And yes, bedtime rituals existed even for the poor. A splash of water on the face, a whispered prayer to keep demons away, maybe a hot drink if you were lucky. But mostly you collapsed into the dark and hoped no one stole your spot. As you settle in, you begin to understand, in the absence of electric lights, Netflix and central heating sleep wasn't optional. It was sacred. And the cold wasn't the enemy. It was the backdrop to a nightly choreography that began with tired feet and ended with the soft sound of breath sinking with breath. The morning's chill still clings to the bed as you shift beneath layers of wool and straw. But don't sit up just yet. There's more to learn from this nest of warmth and humanity. Let's talk about bedding. You glance down at what passes for a mattress, a sack stuffed with straw, maybe hay if you're lucky, but probably scratchy and riddled with the occasional beetle. If you're in a slightly better off home, That sack might be laid on a wood-slatted frame to keep it off the cold stone or earthen floor. There's no memory foam, no springs, just centuries of improvisation and itchy fabric. Blankets come next, and here's where things get a little cozier. Heavy wool is the standard spun from the sheep just outside the door. Sometimes it's dyed dull shades of rust or olive with natural pigments, but more often it's just the color of sheep. And it's thick. Thick enough to trap heat, thick enough to smother sound, and sometimes thick enough to suffocate small arguments about who stole which corner. If you're wealthier, you might have feather-filled quilts or even imported linens, rare, expensive, and often kept for guests or important rituals. But most people wrap themselves in whatever they had: old cloaks, cast-off tunics, or layers of rough fabric stitched together over time. Beds weren't decorated, they were fortified. Now look closer, this isn't a bed for one. Sleeping alone in the Middle Ages, practically unheard of, unless you were a monk, a leper, or deeply disliked. Most people slept together for warmth and safety. Parents with children, siblings in pairs, sometimes even neighbors, if travel or trouble kept them overnight. You can imagine the logistical chaos, snoring, coughing, jabbing elbows, but in the dead of winter, body heat was worth every inconvenience. There's even a word for this bundling. In some cultures, especially colder ones, bundling boards separated unmarried bedmates while still allowing the heat-sharing benefits. A romantic gesture. Not quite. More like medieval insulation strategy with bonus gossip potential. As you adjust your imagined place in this shared pile of limbs and fabric, you hear someone shifting beside you. An older woman pulls another blanket over her head, muttering something about the draft from the door. A child stirs, whimpering from a bad dream, and a hand reaches out to calm them. No words, just warmth. And here's the quirky tidbit. For the night, in some households, people actually kept the family pig indoors during winter, not as a pet, as a space heater. Imagine rolling over at 2 a.m. and finding a snorting, grunting, vaguely muddy pig spooning your leg. Unusual, yes. Effective, also yes. Historians still debate just how widespread these practices were, especially the shared sleeping arrangements. Some say they were limited to the poorest classes. Others argue that even nobility, especially in drafty castles, shared beds with servants or companions. But what's clear is this warmth was a resource, and the bed was where survival met strategy. You wiggle your toes beneath the imagined covers, grateful for your modern blanket back home. But you also feel something else, a strange sense of closeness, not just physical, emotional. There's comfort in the idea that sleep was shared, protected, and above all, respected. Outside the cottage, the wind howls against the thatched roof. But in here, wrapped in wool and nestled in straw, someone sighs and murmurs in their sleep. Maybe it's a prayer. Maybe it's a dream. And you're right where you belong, drifting with them, wrapped in the surprisingly tender traditions of the coldest nights. You stretch slightly careful not to jostle your bedmates and notice something soft and odd sliding over your forehead, a cap. Not just any cap, mind you. This is your sleep cap, and tonight it's doing the unsung work of protecting your ears from frostbite. Because now we turn to one of the most delightfully peculiar accessories of medieval sleep, the nightcap. Yes, it's real. And no, it wasn't just for fashion or old-timey cartoons. In an era before insulation, central heating, or even reliable windows, the simple linen sleep cap was a nightly essential. Men, women, children, everyone wore them. Some were long and floppy, others short and snug, but all were designed with one purpose: preserve precious heat. Imagine sleeping in a stone cottage with no real window panes, just shutters or thin oiled parchment between you and the midnight air. The fire's gone out, the room has chilled, and every bit of warmth matters. Your head, being one of the body's prime heat-leaking culprits, needed covering. You reach up and feel the coarse stitching of your imagined cap. Maybe it's been passed down, re-hemmed, re-dyed. If you're lucky, it was made from a retired tunic. If you're noble, perhaps it's embroidered with your family sigil, because even at night, status mattered. Beside you, that others have their own versions. A young girl's cap is too big and keeps slipping over her eyes. An old man nearby wears a nightcap with a pointed tip that curls slightly like a melted candle. Someone snores through a beard flattened under the edge of a woolen hood. And here's a fun detail: some nightcaps were perfumed. That's right. If you were of the higher classes, your sleepwear might be scented with lavender or rosemary, both for comfort and for a dash of medieval hygiene theater. Because let's face it, bathing wasn't exactly nightly. Smelling vaguely of herbs while you slumbered was a decent compromise. But what about those who couldn't afford a dedicated nightcap? They improvised. A hood from a cloak, a ragged scarf, even wrapping the end of a blanket around the head like a cocoon. Whatever it took to keep the cold out and the dreams in. Historians still argue whether these caps were worn universally or varied by region and class. Some suggest they were more common in northern climates where winters bit hardest. Others believe they were simply part of the evolving medieval fashion of covering the head for modesty, practicality, or both. And then there's the mystery of the cap's disappearance. By the 18th and 19th centuries, nightcaps had become associated with age, eccentricity, or comic relief. Think Ebenezer Scrooge shuffling around in his robe. But in their prime, these humble head coverings were frontline defenders against freezing dreams. You glance at your reflection in a nearby basin, flickering lamplight distorting your features beneath the snug curve of cloth. Not glamorous, not fierce, but warm, safe, human. There's a quiet dignity to the nightcap, isn't there? It says I value rest. I respect the cold. And I know that sleep, like life, sometimes needs a little extra protection. A rooster crows faintly in the distance, far too early to matter. Someone in the room shifts again, and you pull the cap down just a bit more, tucking your ears in fully. Go ahead. Let your thoughts drift. The cap's got you covered. The fire has long since died down, leaving only faint orange embers pulsing beneath the bed of ash. You can feel the cold creeping in again, nosing at your toes and curling around your shoulders. Instinctively, you tuck the blanket tighter beneath your chin and peer across the dim room. But here's the thing, you're not in the bedroom. Because in most medieval homes there was no bedroom. There was just the room. One room, maybe two if you were lucky. And as for fireplaces, they were never in your sleep space. Welcome to one of the more inconvenient truths of medieval architecture. The fireplace, the literal heart of the home, usually sat in the main room and not anywhere near where you laid your head at night. Why? Because open flames, straw bedding, and wooden beams were a combination that even medieval folks knew not to mess with. Fires were cozy, yes, but they were also terrifying. Entire villages could go up from one spark. So when the fire was no longer needed for cooking or gathering, it was either extinguished or carefully banked with ash to keep from flaring up. That meant bedtime got chilly, very chilly. Even in larger homes or castles, fireplaces were often reserved for halls, kitchens, or great chambers, not bedrooms. If you were wealthy, you might have a brazier, a small metal bowl filled with coals, but even that came with risks. Breathing in too much smoke or carbon monoxide while you slept was, let's say, an unintended long-term sleep solution. Instead, people relied on insulation. Not the pink, fuzzy kind in modern attics. They hung thick curtains over beds around sleeping areas, and sometimes from wooden canopies to trap body heat, like a tent within a room. Tapestries hung on stone walls weren't just decorative. They served to block out cold and keep the chill from radiating inward. And of course, there was strategic bed placement. You might curl up closer to the center of the house, near the kitchen hearth if possible, or snuggle behind someone larger to block the draft. Personal space was sacrificed without complaint. Here's your quirky tidbit for this section. Bed curtains weren't just a noble flex. They were surprisingly common, even in modest homes roped together with whatever scraps could be found. Wool linen even stitched together burlap. Anything that could provide a sense of warmth, and let's be honest, a smidge of privacy in a room full of snoring relatives. Historians still argue how much warmth these arrangements actually preserved. Some insist medieval homes were freezing and sleep was miserable. Others argue that people simply adapted layering clothing and accepting cold as a fact of life rather than something to conquer. Regardless, one thing is clear: fire might have fed your soup and lit your stories, but it didn't follow you to beds. You went to sleep with a good cloak, a thick cap, and the hope that the wind didn't sneak past the shutters again. A cold draft kisses your cheek, and you shift beneath the blanket. Across the room, someone rises quietly to check the hearth, just embers now, glowing like sleepy eyes. They kneel, stoke it gently, then tiptoe back to their spot. No words are spoken, just the flick of a blanket, the soft rustle of straw, and then silence once more. As the chill deepens and your thoughts slow, you start to notice something strange. You're wide awake, not panicked, not restless, just peacefully alert. And guess what, in the medieval world, that wasn't unusual. In fact, it was expected. Let's talk about something called segmented sleep. You may not have heard of it, but for centuries people across Europe and beyond slept in two distinct shifts. That's right. They didn't just close their eyes and snooze through the night like a log. Their sleep had an intermission. The first sleep, known in the old writings as first asleep or dead sleep, typically began just after sunset and lasted for a few hours. Then came the waking period, a quiet, still pocket of time in the middle of the night. People used it for prayer reading by candlelight, mending clothes even. Well, let's just say it was a popular time for marital bonding. Then after an hour or two, they drifted into second sleep, often lighter and filled with dreams ending at dawn or shortly before the first cockcrow. Historians rediscovered this pattern by studying old texts, letters, medical manuals, even court records that casually reference first sleep as if everyone just understood it. Because they did. Back then, sleep wasn't a block to be optimized, it was a rhythm to be lived. So if you find yourself lying awake at 2:00 a.m., congratulations, you've just time traveled. Medieval folks would probably nod in solidarity and suggest lighting a taper or whispering a psalm. You sit up slightly, hearing the soft creak of the straw mattress beneath you. Someone on the far side of the room stirs too, not with a groan or complaint, but with the quiet ease of someone who knows this hour. They reach for a pouch near their bed and begin to count prayer beads. Others may be murmuring to themselves. One man seems to be humming a low chant, maybe to soothe a bad dream, or maybe just because the silence asked for company. And here's the quirky detail of the night. In some wealthier homes, people used this midnight break to stoke the hearth again, brew a hot drink, or quietly discuss the next day's plans. It wasn't weird. It wasn't insomnia. It was woven into the very fabric of how time moved. Some scholars still debate whether segmented sleep was universal or more common in rural versus urban areas. Was it purely environmental, based on candlelight and firelight, or cultural, tied to the church bells and evening curfews that shaped medieval schedules? Regardless, it reveals something lovely. People weren't afraid of the night. They worked with it. They allowed their bodies to guide them in and out of rest as naturally as the tides. You lie back again, the sounds of the room slow and hushed. Somewhere outside, an owl hoots soft and solitary. The stars still glitter above the thatch. And slowly, gently, your mind follows the same rhythm they did 1,000 years ago. First sleep, then waking, then second sleep. It's okay to pause in between. It always was. Your eyes flutter open to a sliver of pale gray light slipping through a crack in the shutter. Not sunrise yet, but close. Around you, slow rustlings begin. Someone coughs. A floorboard creaks. A chamber pot scrapes against the wall. It's almost time to rise, but not quite. And in this space between sleep and morning, a new ritual begins warming the day. Unlike our modern mornings, where alarms jolt us upright and coffee is a crash course in consciousness, the medieval morning was more like a simmer than a boil. People woke gradually, layering tasks into the slow return of warmth and daylight. The first and most immediate task, rekindling the fire. Whoever in the household had the job, often the wife, the eldest daughter, or a servant, would shuffle quietly toward the hearth, squatting low to coax life from the faintest ember left overnight. A puff of breath, a prayer, a sprinkle of kindling, and if fortune smiled, a crackle. If not, time to grab flint and steel and try again. This was sacred work. In some homes, fire was never allowed to go out guarded like a temple flame. In others, relighting it each day was a kind of daily resurrection life reborn from ash. As the warmth returns, others stir. A child moans about the cold, pulling a tunic over sleep-matted hair. Someone pulls on hose and shoes without unlacing them. And somewhere, someone is already heading outside to check on the animals, breath puffing like smoke in the pre-dawn chill. And what about the beds? They weren't made in the modern sense. You didn't fluff and smooth and fold decorative throws. You aired them out. Blankets were lifted, straw shaken. Mattresses might be flipped, especially if you shared your bed with someone drooly or restless. In wealthier homes, servants might beat the bedding outside to remove dust or pests. In others, you just hoped the fleas were still asleep. Here's a curious medieval tidbit for your collection. Many homes placed sprigs of herbs, like lavender or wormwood, between the mattress and the bedding. These weren't just for scent, they were thought to ward off insects' curses and bad dreams alike. Talk about multi-purpose linen care. By now, the gray has brightened into a warm gold. The shutters creak open. Light spills across the rush-covered floor. Someone sets down a bowl of cold porridge and mutters a morning blessing. It's not glamorous, but it's real, grounded. A rhythm handed down by generations who learned to greet the day without fanfare but with intention. Historians still debate whether all households followed these same dawn patterns. Did peasants sleep later than nobles? Did urban homes rise earlier than rural ones? There's evidence both ways. But nearly every record agrees on this mornings were communal, gentle, and shaped by necessity. You rise now, too, stretching, rolling your shoulders, brushing straw from your sleeves. You haven't spoken yet, and no one expects you to. Words come later with the light. For now, just breathe. Welcome back to the waking world. You pad across the cold floorboards toward a low wooden bench where your boots wait still damp from yesterday's snowmelt, but at least not frozen solid. You tug them on and glance around the room. The air smells of ash, boiled oats, and sleep. Then you spot it in the corner of the chamber pot. Ah yes, medieval mornings weren't just about warming the hearth or muttering morning prayers. They were also about relieving certain nightly pressures. Because before coffee, before breakfast, before anything else, someone had to deal with what everyone did in the dark. Let's talk medieval bathroom rituals. In most homes, peasant cottages, townhouses, even castles, the chamber pot was a fact of life. A ceramic or metal bowl, sometimes with a lid, tucked under the bed or in a shadowed corner. Easy access, minimal fuss. When nature called at 2 a.m., you didn't trudge out to the woods. You scooted over and hoped no one else had filled it. And in the morning, someone, usually the youngest or least powerful member of the household, carried it outside to be emptied, sometimes into a designated pit, sometimes into a nearby stream, and sometimes just into the street. Yes, that's why upper story windows came with warnings. Garde low, watch out for water. But of course it wasn't water. Even nobles had their version. Close stools were wooden boxes with padded seats and a hidden pot inside essentially early portable toilets. Some were fancy with carvings or embroidered lids. But guess what? Still just a bucket with ideas. And castles. Many had garderobes, stone chutes built into outer walls. You sat, did your business, and gravity handled the rest. The waste fell into a moat or cesspit below. The smell memorable. But hey, it kept the stink outside. Here's your quirky fact of the morning medieval folks. Believed bad smells carried disease, which is surprisingly not too far off base. So they often placed herbs like sage or juniper near their toilet areas to mask odors and purify the air. It didn't help much, but it was an honest effort. Historians still debate just how sanitary these arrangements really were. Some argue that people were cleaner than we give them credit for regularly washing hands and in even scrubbing floors with lye or sand. Others point to the infamous smells of medieval cities as evidence of a less than hygienic reality. And yet, there was a rhythm to it all. A kind of unspoken understanding. Everyone had to go and everyone had to help. Even kings and even monks. even that barefoot kid who just dumped the pot and now hopes it wasn't his turn tomorrow. You watch from the doorway as someone carries the pot outside, holding it with both hands like a sacred vessel. A dog follows at a safe distance. The snow crunches underfoot. There's steam rising faintly from the rim. It's not glamorous, it's not poetic, but it's very, very human. And in a world without plumbing, you learn to respect the simple systems. The bucket, the chute, the whispered mind your step. You smile, because sometimes even history has to go to the bathroom. You step back inside, just as someone is pulling on a hooded cloak, muttering something about chores. Morning has truly arrived now, not with an alarm, but with motion. And what's next on the medieval morning checklist? Light, or rather the chasing of darkness from corners. Unlike our modern flick of the switch convenience, medieval lighting was a ritual in itself. Fire was the obvious centerpiece. Candles, rushlights, and oil lamps provided most of the illumination. But those weren't left burning all night. Too dangerous, too expensive. So every morning, the household relit the lamps. In your corner of the room, a woman crouches beside a three-legged iron stand. She cradles a small pottery lamp, coaxing the wick to life with a shard of flint and a puff of breath. The flame flutters. She shields it with her hand and waits. Then carefully, she moves it to the next lamp in the line, lighting them one by one. It's not dramatic, but it's sacred in its slowness, because in the medieval world, light was not a given. It was precious fleeting, and let's face it, a little moody. Most peasants used rushlight strips of dried rushes soaked in animal fat. Cheap, smoky, and short-lived. You'd burn through several just to make it from supper to bed. If you were slightly wealthier, you might own beeswax candles, clean-burning, long-lasting, and expensive, like only light this on a holy day, expensive. And oil lamps, lovely but messy. They dribbled, they stank, they smoked your ceiling. But they did their job. Here's your quirky light fact of the day. Some medieval folks put mirrors or polished metal behind candles to amplify the glow. Not for vanity, just to stretch one flame a little farther. Even a single flickering source could become a beacon with the right reflective trick. Historians still argue how much light people really had. Was the medieval world as dark as we imagine? Or did our ancestors simply train their eyes to do more with less? Some sources suggest that children could read by rushlight. Others scoff, suggesting they were more likely memorizing than reading anything in that dim haze. What's certain is that light wasn't wasted. If you needed to walk across the room, you carried your candle with you. If you wanted to read, you sat directly beside the hearth. And if you woke in the middle of the night, well, you either knew your steps, or you stubbed your toe on a chest and woke everyone else. The candle in your room flares higher now, casting long shadows up the stone wall. You notice how the flame dances every time someone walks past, pulling a draft behind them. It's alive in a way electricity never quite manages. Another person enters carrying an armful of kindling. The wood is dumped near the hearth, sparking a small flurry of dust. The fire crackles again, grateful perhaps, or maybe just hungry. A soft glow fills the space. Not daylight yet, but almost. And for now it's enough. The light has grown stronger, bleeding through the window slats in soft golden threads. It's time finally for breakfast, or at least something that passes for it in the medieval world. Don't expect pancakes and espresso. This is a quieter ritual, simpler, and oddly enough more forgiving to your sleepy stomach. Welcome to the medieval morning meal. In most households, breakfast wasn't a grand affair. It wasn't even guaranteed. For many people, especially those working the land, it was a practical early snack rather than a sit-down experience. You ate what was ready, what was left over, or what wouldn't spoil. You follow the scent of heat and grain into the main room, where someone is stirring a pot over the now crackling hearth. The contents: pottage, a warm, thick porridge of oats or barley, perhaps thickened with a bit of yesterday's stew. If fortune smiled, it has a scrap of dried fruit or a pinch of crushed herbs. Beside the pot, there's a cloth bundle holding a few slices of coarse, dark bread made of rye or barley, not the fluffy white loaves of nobles. And the drink, not orange juice, not tea, small beer. Yes, even children drank it. Why? Because it was safer than water, which often carried illness. This small beer was weak in alcohol and rich in calories, a low-effort liquid breakfast that doubled as hydration. And no, it didn't make people tipsy, at least not unless you had 5 mugs of it. In wealthier homes, breakfast might include soft cheese-boiled eggs or cold meats. Honey, if available, was a luxury. Butter, even better. But for most, it was bread, warm mush, and a gulp of beer to send you on your way. Here's your quirky tidbit. Medieval monks often had the most structured breakfasts, with exact times and portions set by monastic rules. Some orders fasted until midday. Others allowed a piece of bread and wine after morning prayers, but only if you were old or sick. If you were young and healthy. Sorry, no toast for you. And what about breakfast etiquette? There wasn't much. People didn't hover over their food with phones or utensils. They ate with fingers dipping bread into bowls, scooping with wooden spoons if they were fancy. A clean sleeve made for a decent napkin. You didn't talk much. Morning was for chewing and thinking. You watch as a boy dunks his bread into the pot, then licks the gravy off his fingers before wiping them on his tunic. A girl beside him slurps from a cup, eyes still half closed. No one scolds. This is the hour of silent nourishment. Historians still argue whether breakfast was considered important in the modern sense. The term break fast doesn't even appear consistently in texts until much later. Was it always the first meal of the day? Not necessarily. But the ritual, however modest, was part of the rhythm. Wake warm, eat begin. You accept a piece of warm bread offered to you. It's coarse, a little sour, and crumbles in your fingers. But it's real. It's enough. And as the light brightens and the sounds of the day rise, roosters' footsteps, the clatter of a pail against stone, you feel the quiet leave your body like steam from a bowl. You're fed, you're warm, and you're ready for what comes next. You step outside into the crisp morning air. It greets you like a splash of cold well water, sharp, honest, and full of promise. The village is waking now, not with fanfare, but with quiet certainty. Doors creak open. A goat bleats. A woman drags a bucket across frozen mud. And here begins the daily flow of bodily routine. We've already talked about chamber pots and the business of relief. But now let's talk cleaning up. Hygiene, after all, didn't stop with sleep. Despite what some may think, medieval people weren't entirely grimy or nose blind. They didn't bathe daily, true, but they had their rituals of freshening, rinsing, and respecting the body, and they were serious about them. You follow a young man down a foot-worn path toward a communal washing area, really just a wide basin carved from stone beside a well. He kneels, splashes icy water onto his face, and mutters a short prayer. It's not dramatic, but it's meaningful. People washed their hands and faces every morning. They brushed their teeth with chewed twigs or linen cloths rubbed with ashes or mint. Yes, mint. Medieval dental hygiene had its own low-tech logic. And hair. If you were lucky, you had a comb carved from bone or wood often shared among the household. Lice were a problem, sure, but combing was part of the routine, not just vanity protection. Here's your curious tidbit. Some wealthier folks used rose water or vinegar rinses on their skin or hair. Vinegar was thought to repel illness, and it might have worked at least better than rubbing onions on your armpits, which was another recorded method. Historians still debate just how dirty the medieval world truly was. Some scholars say it wasn't until the Black Death that fear of water as a disease spreader led to a dip in washing frequency. Others believe the idea of stinky, unwashed peasants is more Victorian slander than medieval fact. What is certain is that people cleaned with intention, not extravagantly, but regularly. The washing area grows more crowded. Children jostle each other with wet elbows. An older woman soaks her feet, humming softly. A boy pours water over his little brother's head, both shrieking with laughter and cold. It's oddly beautiful, this quiet chaos of communal cleansing. No soap suds, no mirrors, just people waking up with water. You glance to the side and see someone scraping at their boots with a stick. Mud and manure from the road come off in thick clumps. Cleanliness wasn't just about skin, it was survival. Dirty feet meant infections. Dirty hands meant illness. No hand sanitizer, sure, but a strong rinse and a bit of soapwort. That could make all the difference. The sun rises higher. Steam curls from warm skin. Towels more like coarse cloths really are wrung out and hung to dry on branches. You dip your hands into the basin. The water stings at first, then refreshes. You scrub your fingers, splash your face, run wet palms across your neck. You don't smell like roses, but you smell like morning. And in a world where the body was a vessel, not just of labor, but of spirit, this moment matters. You're clean, you're awake, and now the day truly begins. The village hum is rising now, not loud, but unmistakable. A distant clang of hammer on metal, the rhythmic thunk of a hand mill grinding grain, wooden cartwheels creaking as they navigate rutted lanes. And you're off to the most unexpectedly fascinating stop of the day, the public latrine. That's right. If you lived in a Roman city or a bustling medieval town, your morning might include a trip to the shared bathroom, not because you wanted to socialize, but because plumbing was public. You follow a narrow path through town, past stone shops with carved signs, until you reach a squat building near the forum. The air shifts. There's a dampness here, an earthy smell, but also something else, a sense of strange civility. You've arrived at a Roman latrine, a long stone bench with keyhole-shaped openings built over a steady water channel. No stalls, no doors, just a line of seats and an open invitation to sit and chat. Yes, chat, because these were not places of privacy. They were public communal and often positioned near bathhouses or marketplaces. People used them while discussing politics, weather, and grain prices. Imagine today's coffee shop with less caffeine and more toilet humor. A marble basin near the door contains a sponge on a stick, the tersorium. You may shudder, but Romans thought it was perfectly reasonable. Dip it in running water, clean yourself, leave it for the next guest. Hygienic, debatable. Efficient, definitely. And here's your quirky fact. Many latrines featured mosaic warnings or poems. One popular inscription read Cave Canem, beware the dog. Another warned, he who sits long shall pay dearly. Humor and hygiene went hand in hand. Historians still argue how often these facilities were cleaned. Some say daily maintenance crews kept things flowing. Others note the layers of deposits found in latrine drains, suggesting less than ideal upkeep. Still, they were advanced for their time, with sewer systems running water and even rudimentary ventilation. And the sounds, splashes, chuckles, footsteps on tile, the occasional grunt, but also a kind of intimacy. You sit beside a stranger, separated only by shared routine. There's no pretending here. Everyone is equal on the bench. Later in medieval towns, similar setups emerged: communal outhouses near rivers or behind taverns. In castles, guardrobes returned. Built into thick stone walls, they projected waste directly outside, often over a moat. Some had curtains, others had nothing. Modesty was optional. Gravity was constant. You peek around the edge and see an older man, adjusting his tunic, preparing to sit. He nods at you, casual, unsurprised. Just another morning on the marble. A young boy skips in next, holding a bucket of water. Maybe he's cleaning. Maybe he's just there for the gossip. You smile, because in this world, restrooms weren't private. They were public routines handled with grace and occasionally poetry. You step away, back into the morning sun. The sounds fade behind you, but the memory lingers, not gross, not crass, just real, and oddly enough, respectful. Even nature's business had its place in the architecture of life. You leave the public latrine behind, stepping back onto the sun-warmed stone path, grateful for the breeze. The city is fully awake now. Vendors shouting sandals, slapping birds wheeling overhead, and your next stop in this surprisingly soothing Roman morning is somewhere just as routine and just as revealing: the bathhouse. Yes, it's time for a cleansing. That's also a community event. You head toward a large domed building, steam already curling from its vents like morning incense. The bathhouse thermi in Latin wasn't just about hygiene. It was about rest rhythm ritual. It was how Romans kept their skin clean and their social calendars even cleaner. You enter through a columned portico, passing by niches where shoes and cloaks are left. A young boy hands you a strigil, a curved metal scraper for oil and sweat, and gestures toward the apditerium, the changing room. Inside, men sit on benches chatting as they undress full tunics and rub themselves with olive oil. Yes, oil, not soap. Why? Because the Roman way was to lather with oil, then scrape it all off. Dirt, dust, and dead skin clung to it like gossip to a forum bench. You move next into the tepidarium, the warm room. Soft heat wraps around you like a linen blanket from the sun. Murals decorate the walls, sea creatures, gods, gentle blues, and terracottas. A man stretches on a stone bench. Another pours warm water from a jug over his arms. You inhale deeply. Steam and eucalyptus, maybe even crushed bay leaf. The Romans knew their herbs. Then comes the caldarium, the hot room. Steam thick as soup. Water hisses on brick floors. A fire burns beneath the stone slabs, heating them from below. Bathers pour water over themselves, or sit with eyes closed, letting the warmth melt everything heavy. It's meditative, a Roman sauna with columns. You learn a quirky fact. Some bathhouses had cold plunge pools next to the hot rooms, like a reset button for your nervous system. One nobleman wrote that the shock of the cold water clarified the soul, though it probably just made him gasp. And the frigidarium, that's where you go next. A room of cold air, cold stone, and a cold pool. It makes your skin pebble. It also wakes you up better than any rooster. But it's not just the temperatures that shift here, it's the tone. The bathhouse is a social space where men discuss deals, poetry, politics. There's laughter, gossip, and the rhythmic splash of water. Massages, too, performed by attendants who rub, stretch, and crack joints with surprising tenderness. Historians still argue about who could enter which bathhouse and when. Were men and women always separated? Not entirely. Some facilities had designated hours. Others were mixed, especially in the early empire. By the later centuries, stricter rules appeared, though enforcement likely varied. You make your way back to the palaestra, the exercise yard attached to the complex. Here men practice wrestling, javelin, and running before heading in to sweat it all off. It's the gym locker room and spa rolled into one. Finally, you dry off with a linen cloth. Your skin feels clean, maybe even radiant. The kind of clean that comes from ritual, from taking time. You pass a mosaic on the way out, tiny tiles forming a dolphin leaping over waves. A nod to Neptune, or just a favorite image of refreshment. Either way, it works. You step outside again, blinking against the light. The city noise returns carts, merchants' footsteps, but you're changed. Lighter, calmer, a little steamed, a little wiser, because for the Romans, bathing wasn't a chore. It was a pause, a gift to the body and the spirit, and today you received it. You wander on skin, still tingling from the bathhouse heat, moving back into the rhythm of Roman streets. Dust swirls, cloaks flap. There's a sense of momentum now. People are walking with purpose. Voices are rising, and midday shadows begin to stretch across the cobblestones. But amid this buzz of imperial life, let's shift our focus downward to the actual infrastructure behind the bathroom breaks, because you're about to explore one of ancient Rome's most quietly impressive accomplishments, the sewer system. Specifically, you make your way toward a low arched tunnel just beyond the city forum. It's modest from the outside, barely marked, but step inside carefully, and you're walking into the Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer, literally, built over 2,500 years ago, and still channeling waste in parts of the empire centuries later. The Cloaca Maxima was a marvel of engineering, a vast stone-lined tunnel that moved not just sewage, but rainwater, kitchen runoff, and street grime. It was the digestive tract of the city, and it wasn't alone. Smaller sewers crisscrossed neighborhoods, leading into the main artery. Some were simple trenches, lined with stone slabs. Others were tall enough to walk through torch in hand. Roman engineers were masters of gradient designing everything to flow with gravity, without a pump or plug in sight. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some wealthier homes had indoor plumbing. A pipe led from the house's latrine down into a covered drain that connected to the larger system. Not every home, of course. Most people still relied on chamber pots or communal latrines. But if you had the coin, you could flush with dignity. Historians still argue about maintenance. Did crews regularly clean these systems, or were they self-regulating through sheer volume? The answer seems to be a bit of both. There are records of workers known as foricariae, early sanitation officials tasked with clearing blockages, repairing drains, and generally keeping the underground world moving. You duck slightly as you follow a maintenance man down the tunnel. He carries a hooked stick, a torch, and a nose hardened by time. He mutters about rats. He knows every bend by heart. The walls around you sweat with moisture. Water trickles past your boots. The smell is not delightful, but not as foul as you'd expect. This isn't a stagnant cesspool. It's a living machine, the digestive system of a city built on marble and ambition. And above it, life goes on. People laugh, argue trade, olives for eggs. They eat, they drink. And when the need arises, they use the facilities, never wondering where it all disappears to. Out of sight, out of mind. But you know, you've walked the tunnels, you've heard the echoes, and in those echoes, you catch something almost poetic, a civilization that planned for everything, not just glory and temples, but runoff, overflow, the quiet, smelly details of daily life. The Romans believed cleanliness was part of civilization. A dirty city wasn't just unpleasant, it was dangerous, unhygienic, barbaric. So they built this underground network, not out of luxury, but out of logic. And honestly, it worked. You follow the tunnel until it empties into the Tiber, the great river that has carried away secrets and stories for millennia. The current catches the stream and pulls it away. Silent, purposeful. You climb out back into the light. You'll never look at a sewer grate the same way again. You brush the dust from your tunic and step back into the midday flow. Romans swirl around you, merchants counting coins, children chasing one another, past fruit stalls, scribes squinting into scrolls while walking never a great combo. And even though the city is at full tilt, one thing stands out now, more than ever. Everyone has a rhythm. You begin to notice it, the subtle scheduling of life. The way Romans orchestrated their day, not around alarms or calendar apps, but around natural cues and communal habits. Let's talk about timekeeping Roman style. You pass a tall columned structure with a raised platform on it. A man gestures toward the sky while reading from a device that resembles a bird bath. It's a sundial, a solarium. Not a luxury, but a public tool. The shadow it casts tells the hour. The crowd around him reading the day's passage like it's a newspaper headline. But sundials only worked in daylight, of course. At night or during cloudy days, wealthier households and institutions used water clocks, clepsydra vessels that dripped in measured amounts calibrated by line markings. Not portable, but functional. Priests used them in temples, doctors in surgeries, and bathhouse attendants so no one lingered too long. There was no beep to start your shift or ping for your break. Instead, Romans followed temporal hours, 12 divisions of daylight, which meant the hours got longer in summer, shorter in winter. Sunrise marked the beginning of the hora prima first hour. Midday arrived at Hora Sexta, the sixth hour, what we call noon. And often around then, something special happened. You slow your walk, now stepping into the quiet hush of a shaded courtyard. People are reclining, not fully asleep, but resting. A few nap, others read or chat softly. It's the midday pause meridiatio, a Roman version of the siesta. And this pause, it wasn't laziness, it was wisdom. In the hottest part of the day, when productivity dropped and tempers flared, Romans chose stillness. Not enforced, not legislated, just understood. Shops might shudder briefly. Legal matters paused. Even the courts sometimes recessed during the 6th and 7th hours. Historians still argue whether this custom was universal or mostly urban. Rural workers likely powered through. But in cities like Rome, Ostia, or Antioch, the midday rest was almost sacred, and it tied back to everything you've seen: the baths, the latrines, the scroll that said wait until morning. Roman life was noisy, busy, ambitious, but also deeply aware of the body, its limits, its signals, its rhythms. You sit on a low wall observing. A baker snoozes beside his cart head, tilted just so. A pair of girls whisper while weaving small wreaths from olive branches. An old man waters his potted herbs. Everything moves gently. Here's your quirky fact of the day. Some scholars believe Roman soldiers scheduled marches around these temporal rhythms, pausing near Hora Sexta to rest and eat before pressing on. Even war followed a sleep cycle. A stray cat pads past your foot. Somewhere a wooden chime clinks in the breeze. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine this rhythm as music, not a steady drum beat, but a gentle rise and fall. Action and pause. Work and hush. The sun begins to tilt westward. The pause will lift soon. Marketplaces will bustle again. Magistrates will return to their chambers. Gossip will resume. But for now, in this pocket of shade and silence, you breathe in the Roman day and understand it just a little better. You rise slowly from your shady perch, letting your limbs stretch into the warmth of late afternoon. The air has shifted once again. It's not cooler exactly, but gentler. The city begins to stir from its midday hush, like a collective exhale after a long-held breath. It's time to witness how the Romans wrapped up their days, not with a sprint, but with ritual and routine, often involving food stories, and yes, one final bathroom trip before bed. You follow a narrow street toward a domus, a private home modest but welcoming. Lamps are being lit. A servant carries a woven basket of figs past you, the smell of roasted garlic drifting from the atrium. There's a rustle of linens being shaken out, cups being rinsed, sandals being unstrapped at the door. Dinner or cena wasn't always grand, but it was unfailingly deliberate. Evenings were when Romans reassembled family friends, slaves, guests, all reclining on cushioned couches, if space allowed, or seated on stools with platters passed hand to hand. You peer inside as the family gathers. The meal begins. Light olives, boiled eggs, maybe a lentil salad. Then comes warm bread, cheese, dried fruits. A stew follows, gently steaming in a clay pot, thick with barley chickpeas, and whatever meat the market offered that day. Not lavish, but satisfying. Wine flows, but always mixed with water. To drink it straight was uncivilized, almost barbaric. They sip slowly, not to dull the senses, but to relax the mind. And with the food comes talk, the kind of talk that drifts stories from the forum, updates on relatives, the latest gossip about a senator's runaway dog. Children lean in, elders smile. Someone recites a line of Virgil, half remembered and lovingly misquoted. Then here comes your quirky detail, the Ursius. It's a small jug passed around late in the meal. You're invited to rinse your hands with a splash of scented water, rosemary or lavender if you're lucky. A tiny towel follows. Cleanliness always, even in the final hours of the day. Historians still debate what bedtime looked like in most Roman homes. Was there a fixed hour? Likely not. But there was an understood wind down, a tapering of noise, a softening of steps, the quiet tug of sleep. Children might be told tales of gods and monsters, how Mercury tricked Apollo, how Venus laughed at mortals. Not just to entertain, but to coax dreams. You walk now through a quiet alley. Lamplight flickers in upper windows. A dog barks once, then settles. You pass a shopkeeper locking his door with a whispered prayer to Mercury, god of travelers. Even locks had patrons here. And then you come upon one last latrine, this one humble, barely marked, but with a familiar red cloth hung outside. A silent sign. Someone is inside preparing for rest. You smile at the thought, because that's the thread that's run through all of this, hasn't it? From the painted tiles in the bathhouse to the timing of afternoon naps, from the careful mosaics on latrine floors to the family cloth codes. The Romans weren't just masters of conquest. They were connoisseurs of routine, of rhythm, of respect for the body and its boundaries. And in those quiet routines, the pauses between the power, there's something deeply human, something you recognize even now. The wind shifts again. A shutter creaks. A lullaby begins somewhere low and wavering, sung by a grandmother with a voice like warm stone. And as you pause in this alley of flickering lamps and soft sandals, you feel it. The hush, the great Roman hush. Not silence exactly, but permission to stop, to breathe, to rest. Let yourself sink into this moment. The light is fading, not sharply but slowly, as if the whole city is exhaling, letting go of its stories and footsteps and scrolls. The lamps glow like gentle stars along the streets, flickering behind linen curtains and over tiled floors still warm from the sun. The air is softer now. It carries hints of rosemary from dinner dust, from sandals long since tucked away, and the faint hush of water dripping in some unseen fountain. It moves around you, not with urgency, but with ease. A breeze that's learned the art of quiet. You've walked the rhythm of an entire Roman day. You've crouched in latrines, strolled past scribes napped in courtyards, and listened at doorways where silence meant more than words. You've seen how even bathroom breaks were planned, shared, respected, woven into the pulse of life, like everything else the Romans touched. But now, the world is slowing. You feel it in your shoulders. You're breathing the gentle pull behind your eyes. You don't need to hold on to facts or timelines. You don't need to recall which hour meant what. You've lived it. You've felt it. Let those memories dissolve like herbs in warm bathwater. Let your thoughts soften like wax near a flame. Let your body sink into rest, the way the sun sinks behind tiled roofs, the way temple doors close for the night. There's no need to do anything now. No scrolls to copy. No floors to sweep. No appointments to keep.